Well, thanks for joining us here, Al. I'm looking forward to this one for a long time. When we conceived of this project, we're very much thinking about what you started here in the early 90s. We have a whole generation of people who, both farmers, dealers, even manufacturers, who may not even remember what it was like harvesting prior to the yield monitor. Can you kind of answer that question, what it would be like without it, for those who've never done it any other way?
Well, back before yield monitors, some farmers they would have an idea of their yield by how full their bins got, and what they took into town to the elevator if they weren't able to hold it, and so on. So at best, farmers knew, unless they were running, some would run small strip trials, using a weigh wagon from their seed dealer, that kind of thing. I'm not sure how far back that goes. I'm sure, but well before I was trying to develop the yield monitor. But one thing that I do recall very vividly is I didn't, nor did farmers, or I don't think anybody, really realize the yield variations that you found going across a field. The yield monitor certainly was a big revelation to farmers that it would show them yield differences across their field that were not easily visible. Obviously, 200 bushel per acre corn versus the wet spot where you're getting nothing, you can see that. But it was not at all uncommon for most farmers to see, even in a good year, could see up to 2-to-1 yield variation across their field. So they were surprised by the highs, surprised by the lows. And of course, that's where I think over the years farmers have tried to understand, well, why is this so high? Why is this so low? And have tried to address reasons for that. I know I've heard stories that improving the drainage, the tiling on farms, that yield monitors caused a lot of that to happen. Farmer could show his yield map to his landlord, and back in those days, I'm sure the sharecropping was much more common. Today, it's almost all cash rent today, but show the landlord what profit they're losing through yield because of poor drainage, that kind of thing, and a lot of other things, weed pressure. I know a local farmer who was one of the first ones that he bought one of the first 10 monitors I sold in 1992. He actually figured out that he had one field that he was having poor soybean yields and spots, and he eventually figured out that he had soybean cyst nematode was moving into his soil, and he wouldn't have known that otherwise if he was just looking at the averages of the field. In another instance, he grows a lot of seed corn. He found out that drift from fungicide that he was spraying on seed corn was improving his bean yields in certain areas. Otherwise he wouldn't have known that because it was only on edges of fields and that kind of thing, and in the direction that the wind was blowing that particular day.
So tell us what was happening leading up to 1986 when you started playing around in the basement.
Well, where I ended up today basically is a product of the terrible recession that happened in the 1980s. That was the farm crisis of the 80s, and although there wasn't a name, there were crises. And in the automotive industry, it was the first time the U.S. government bailed out Chrysler Corporation. And it was a real crisis, even probably worse for some of the construction equipment companies in the 1980s. So the first 10 years that I worked for the Sunstrand Corporation was a lot of fun. The division I was in was doing new things, expanding, got to develop a lot of new products. And, once 1981 hit and the big slide started, because I recall, I think in ag, the sales of their products went down 5 or 6 years in a row because their customers' products were continuing, the sales were continuing to go down year after year. And, I can't blame them because they had to to do the things to keep their doors open, but it was there was just not as much emphasis on new product development. And I got to the point that I always like to develop new products. I wasn't really happy with my job, so I had a young family then, so I couldn't really just up and decide, well, I'm going to do something completely different. And the machinery manufacturers, they weren't hiring anybody. They were getting rid of lots of people. So I just kept thinking about, could I start a company to create a product to start my own company? And over a period of years, I brainstormed a lot of ideas. And finally, by mid to late 1985, I got motivated enough to say, I think a combine yield monitor would be something that would be useful to farmers. Of course, my dad was still farming then. He didn't retire till 1999. So I asked him if I tried to develop one, would he field test one for me? And of course, he said yes. And so I started working on one and had a crude prototype in the field in the fall of 1986 on his combine, and then kept refining it over several years. And it was a tough journey because it was a tough thing to develop something that worked accurately enough to be a sellable product.
What was it that was the genesis of that idea?
Well, looking back, you have to keep in mind that I had no idea what precision farming, as we call it today, would become. I decided to focus on the yield monitor because, yield is the farmer's paycheck. It's the number one thing he's interested in. And, I just thought, well, if a product can be developed that works, is accurate enough, and so on, why wouldn't a lot of farmers buy that to be able to get a better read on their yields, easier check hybrids, know what's coming off different fields and that kind of thing. I had the vision to make yield maps, but when I started developing the yield monitor, I did not even know that the GPS system existed. That really wasn't out there in the general public yet. I'd anticipated, making maps with dead reckoning, compasses, that kind of a thing. But of course, GPS came along, and a couple of years after I started the business, it was starting to become usable, and that's kind of what's the GPS technology, the ability to know exactly where you're at, and the advancement in electronics technology and so on has really allowed precision farming to become this huge, broad-ranging type of products and industry that it is today.